Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and as usual I'm round the garage messing about with cars. I do have a couple of things I want to look at on MAUDE, my Mark II ESCORT MOREDOOR, later on, but the main focus of my attention today is to give my dad's trusty Mark I Focus some TLC. Now those of you who have been following my videos will know that I've been using my dad's Focus estate for the last few weeks while MAUDE was out of action. She's running absolutely sweet, but she is due a new cam belt soon. Now the Focus is running a blacktop Z-Tech, just like my Mark II is, but this one's an 1800 instead of the 2 litre in my ESCORT. Now the cam belt changes on these engines are every 100,000 miles, and my dad's Focus has now done 206,000 miles. But according to the extensive paperwork we got with the car when he bought it, the last cam belt was actually done at 117,000 miles, so we're well within time. The cam belt change on this car is a little bit trickier than doing it in my car, because obviously the engine is still in front wheel drive configuration, which means all the pulleys are really tight up against the inner wing. I came round here yesterday and made a start on the job, and I've managed to remove some of the bits that I need to get out of the way before I can actually change the cam belt. Now because this engine mount is in the way, what I need to do is put a jack underneath the engine and remove this. I did remove it yesterday to be able to remove all the bits that I have done so far, but obviously I had to put it back on so that I could leave my car here overnight without leaving my jack out. Now before I start work, I'll just show you the kit that I'm going to be fitting. This is a Gates cam belt kit and it includes the water pump. Now you don't necessarily have to change the water pump when you do a cam belt kit on a blacktop Z-Tech, because they can be changed without taking the cam belt off. I got this kit really cheap and it came with the water pump, so we're going to swap it over anyway. According to the paperwork that came with this car, the water pump itself was actually done only about 50,000 miles ago. So I'm going to take this water pump off my dad's engine and keep it in the garage as a spare. Now I got this cam belt kit from an old neighbour of mine called Gary, who you would have seen in one of my old videos. He's the one who's got the Fiat Uno and the Polo Coupe. He sold it to me for a really good price. I know Gary watches the video, so thanks again for that, mate. I hope everything's going well in your new house. And I'm hoping to meet up with Gary later on in the year at one of the shows at Santa Pod. Right, time for me to crack on. So the first thing I'm going to do is jack up the engine and take the engine mount back off. And if you're going to jack your engine up by the sump, make sure you've got a bit of wood in between the sump and your jack. Right, so now the engine mount's out of the way, I'll just explain what I removed yesterday. So I've removed this plastic cover from here, which is broken. And then I removed the auxiliary belt, which goes around so many more things than it does in my ESCORT. Obviously this has got air conditioning and power steering. And then once the belt was off, I was able to remove the bottom crank pulley. Got this trim out of the way. And there was also another bit of plastic trim under here, which I removed. So yeah, crank pulley removed. And I also removed the water pump. Right, what I'm going to get off now is this idler pulley here. And then this cover, which is also the engine mount on this engine. It's easier to show you off the car how this is removed. So, got this pulley that's held on like that. Don't forget this spacer. And then these bolts hold the cover to the engine. This one's a Torx for some reason, and the rest are just normal bolts. I did have to keep raising and lowering the engine to get certain ones of these bolts out, because obviously the bolt is just hitting on the inner wing when you're trying to remove it. But yeah, now that's out of the way. One thing I didn't mention earlier is there is another plastic cover at the bottom which attaches there, and that's just removed by taking out the 2 bolts there. Right, so now I actually have access to the cam belt. Now before I take this old cam belt off, I need to lock the cams and the crank so that it all stays in time while I do the swap. And to do that, I'm going to use this kit here. Now this bar basically goes into a couple of slots in the back of the cams to lock the cams, and then you use one of these threaded things here that screws into the block just underneath the exhaust manifold, and that will lock the crank. And where it screws in is down there, basically next to the crank sensor. There's a bolt, and you remove that and then you insert the threaded bolt in the kit. So obviously to gain access to the cams so that I can put the bar in the slots in the back of them, I need to remove this rocker cover. So that's what I'm going to do next. Looks like I'm going to have to remove this engine hook so that I can get this off part of the heat shield or what, I don't know. Hopefully I can just loosen it rather than removing it completely. Yep. I'm always amazed at how good condition these cams are in these Zetec's. I mean, this engine has done over 200,000 miles and there is no visible marks on them cam lobes at all. Anyway, these are the slots in the back of the cams I was talking about, where you put the bar in to lock the cams. So I need to turn the engine over so that both of them slots are horizontal, which is when the engine is at TDC. Then I can lock the bar in place and then I know that the cams are locked in position. Right, so now I need to get the crank locking tool in place, and that is the bolt there I need to remove and replace with one of the bolts from the locking kit. It's a bit of hassle with this exhaust manifold in the way. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to film this, but I'll catch back up with you when I've managed to thread the crank locking tool in. Right, so got the crank locking tool in place now. I've put the shorter one of these two pins in. I'm pretty sure this longer one is for the ST170 motor, but I'll find out now. Now what I'm going to do now is remove this bar from the cams and then try and turn the engine over again with a spanner. Now in theory, if it was all set perfectly in time last time the cam belt was done, when I take this out, nothing should move because the pin is in the crank. And it does move, so either I've got the wrong pin in there or the timing wasn't done bang on last time. So right, I'm just going to switch the pin round for the longer one. I've wound the engine back so it's slightly before TDC now, so hopefully when I try and turn the engine this time with a spanner, it should stop dead on the point where this bar will slide back into the cams. Right, so the engine won't turn any further now because the pin is stopping the crank. And the bar goes into the cam. So whoever done the cam belt last, done it perfectly. When I replaced the cam belt on the blacktop Zetec that's in my Mark II, it actually wasn't bang on accurate. It wasn't far off, to be honest, so it's not a massive deal. And obviously when I set it, I've done it perfectly. So now that everything's locked in time, it's now safe to remove the cam belt. And the cam belt kit also comes with a new idler pulley, which is this one, and a new tensioner pulley, which is this one. So what I'm going to do now is crack this bolt off, which will loosen the tensioner, and then that will mean that I can get the belt off and then basically just remove both of those pulleys. So now it's just a case of putting the new pulleys on with the new belt. One thing you've got to watch out for, the locking pin for the crank won't allow the engine to rotate in the direction it goes when it's running, but it does allow it to rotate backwards. I'll show you what I mean under here. So the pin won't let you rotate it clockwise, but you can go backwards. So when you've got the belt on, all the pulleys, you just need to make sure that the crank is against the pin. Gates, power grip. Got to set the tension of the cam belt with this tensioner pulley, and I'll just show you on the old one how it's supposed to be done. So obviously it's got a bolt in the middle here holding it to the engine, that bolt. So you crack that off a little bit, and then you use an Allen key in here to set the tension. And basically you set the tension until this pointer is in line with this square cutout here. So basically it'll be something like that, and then you do the bolt up. Now when your engine warms up, this will move out of alignment with the cutout here, so obviously the tension of the cam belt must be set when the engine is cold. I've actually made a mistake, because on the back of this bit where that square cutout is, this should hook in to a little slot on the engine, and I haven't done that, so I'm just going to loosen the pulley off and make sure that's where it needs to be, and then I can set the tension. Right, so that's the cam belt all on and tensioned up. As you can see, the pointer is within that square cutout, so that's accurately set. What I'm going to do now though is I'm going to remove the locking tools from the engine and turn the engine over by hand a couple of times, and then put the locking tools back in just to check that it stays in time. And I'm going to do that a few times before I actually bolt everything back together, just to make sure that it's definitely all in time. And also each time I'll check that the tension stays correct as well. Right, so I've turned the engine over a few times and I've got it back to TDC. Got the bar back in the cams, and I've got the locking pin back in, locking the crank. One thing I should have done was taken the spark plugs out, which would have made it easier to turn the engine over, but I was being lazy. The lazy man works twice as hard. Anyway, so same as earlier, if I now take this bar out and try and turn the engine over, it shouldn't move at all, which will mean that the crank and the cams are perfectly in alignment. Yep, doesn't move at all. So now I know that the timing is all perfect. And if I just have a look at the tension on the tensioner pulley, that's pretty much in line. I'm just going to tweak it so that it's in the middle of that square, and then I can torque up the pulleys and start putting the car back together. Yeah, I can't remember what the torques are supposed to be. I've done this one up to like 28 Newton meters. This one I've done a little bit less because the bolt's quite small, so I've done that up to 20. Right, just going to fit the new water pump now, which goes there. And it's just held on with 4 small bolts. It doesn't need a gasket because it's got this O-ring on it, which is pretty cool. And these bolts don't have to be tight at all. I think they might be like 10 foot-pounds or something. I've actually stripped these threads before on the water pump on my ST170, and I had to replace the water pump housing that the water pump bolts to. Right, so that is the cam belt kit and the water pump all fitted. It literally is just a case of putting the car back together now. I'm going to start by doing the rocker cover, and then I'll put these cam belt covers back on the front of the engine, and then I'll fit the crank pulley and the water pump pulley. So I'll catch back up with you when I've made some more progress. Right, so starting to look more like an engine now. The next thing I need to put on is the auxiliary belt. Now this bolt here that holds the crank pulley on, I think Ford recommends you change that when you do a cam belt, but I haven't got a new one, so I've just put some blue thread lock on it. I would advise you listen to Ford before you listen to me, but it should be alright. Now the auxiliary belts on these have a tensioner pulley. I've obviously already cracked off the bolt before I started doing the job, and when the bolt's cracked off, you can basically use a spanner on this bolt to move the tensioner pulley, and then you can get the belt on and then let go, and then it's tensioned. Now I actually changed this auxiliary belt not too long ago, and I found it was really hard to remember the route that it takes around all those pulleys. So this time I've used my brain and a pen, and I drew a diagram yesterday before I took it apart. I'll just show you the difference between this and my setup. Now, as you can see, this one's pretty complicated, really long belt, compared to mine, which goes round the alternator, round this idler pulley, round the water pump, and then round the crank, and that is it. Obviously my setup doesn't have a tensioner pulley, and you just set the tension on this alternator bracket here. Yeah, this is so much easier to work on, man. Anyway, back to the focus. Let's get this auxiliary belt fitted. Right, so I just torqued up the engine mount. The first post on a forum that I came across said that these should be 59 foot-pounds, and the three that are holding the mount to the car should be 66 foot-pounds. Sounds about right. Now I can put this coolant reservoir back. It's just one bolt that holds it there, and it slides into a little groove there. Now, one thing I really do need to torque up properly is this crank pulley bolt. That needs to be 85 foot-pounds. But the way I'm going to do that is get the wheel back on and get the car on the ground, and then have the car in gear with the handbrake on, and then I'll be able to get that done up to 85 foot-pounds. One more bit of plastic to put on this car, and the job is done. So there it is, the focus is all back together. I need to put some coolant in this bottle. I don't have any here, so I might end up putting water in it, but I'm not taking it back to my dad till tomorrow, so I could just pick up some tomorrow. I don't know if it comes across very well on the camera, but this engine really does run sweet, considering it's done 206,000 miles. Well, it's actually nearly 207,000 miles. Right, so I'm sure my dad will be really happy to get his Focus back tomorrow, and I'm just glad that I can keep the car running without him giving loads of money to a mechanic. This was never meant to be a really detailed tutorial on this job, but if there is anything you want me to explain in a little bit more detail, do let me know via the comments. If you thought this video was any good, do please give it a like and a share, and if you haven't already done so, do feel free to subscribe to the channel to be kept right up to date with future uploads. I'm going to end this video here. Check out my Facebook and my Instagram using the links in the description of this video. Until next time, thanks for watching.